Hello friends and welcome to today's video, and if you're new here, nice to meet you. Today's video we're going to be making some ritual candles, and these candles could be made for any type of spell work or ritual work, but in today's video we'll be focusing specifically on an orange and black candle that you can make for Samhain. The first ingredient you will need is soy wax, and this soy wax is specifically made for containers, so we're going to be mixing it 50-50 with beeswax to make it a little harder so it's easier to hold up in the taper candle form. This beeswax comes in these tiny little pellets, just making it easier to melt, but if you have a big block of beeswax, you can cut that up and use that as well. If you just have beeswax, you could also make it entirely out of beeswax, but I find it slightly easier to dye it with a little bit of soy wax. You will also need some candle dyes, and today I'm just going to be using a little bit of orange, yellow, and some black, and I got these off Amazon. They come in these tiny little pieces and they're very potent. Think of it sort of like food dye. You just need a few little pieces to color your wax, and so this tiny little bag will yield many uses. And you're also going to need the ancestor incense that we made in the first week of the Samhain series. So if you didn't already make that, I'll leave a link up here and also in the description box so you can go back and make it. But of course, if you're just watching this video to learn how to make the candles and you're not going to be making these for Samhain, you could substitute whatever herbs that you're going to be using for your specific ritual. You are also going to need an empty can. I'm using a beer can, but of course you can use whatever beverage you want. It doesn't really matter. As long as it's a taller, thinner can. I'm using a 16-ounce can because something like a 12-ounce soda can just won't be tall enough to dip your candle in, and you'll end up with a very tiny candle. But of course, if you're a candle maker and you have a larger vessel, you can use that. I just find that wastes a ton of wax since you have to fill up this giant jar just to get a few candles out. Once you've enjoyed your beverage, you're going to want to cut the lid off of this. And I don't suggest doing it like this. It's a bit dangerous, but that's all I had. But if you have a can opener that leaves a clean edge, one of those ones that doesn't cut you, that would probably be best, but just cut the lid off as best as you can here. Of course, this is going to leave some jagged edges, but it shouldn't really be much of a problem since you're not going to be handling the top part of this can so much. But if you can find a candle pouring vessel that's small and thin like this, let me know in the comments down below, because all I can find are those big 4-pound or 2-pound candle aluminum pouring jars, and that's just way too much wax to be using for a couple of candles. You're also going to need a length of candle wicking. Here I'm using hemp wax, which I'll link down below. And you're also going to need something to weigh down your wicking when you're dipping it, so you can use these metal nuts that you can find at any hardware store. You probably have some lying around already. Cut your wicking to the length that you want your candles to be, also depending on the size of your can. I would cut the wick about 2 to 3 inches longer than you think you'll need so you can hang them up to dry. Start by pouring equal amounts of both soy wax and beeswax into your can. And this might look like a lot of wax for the can, but once it starts melting down, you're going to have to keep adding more and more to the can. And I used about 1.5 cups of each for a total of 3 cups for the 16-ounce can. You never want to place candle wax directly into a pot, so you're going to fill a small pot about halfway with water and place it over medium heat. And then once it starts to heat up, turn it down to low and let it simmer. And as you can see, the wax is reducing substantially, so just keep adding spoonfuls and keep adding as it goes down. Also keep in mind that soy wax melts pretty quickly in a couple of minutes, but beeswax takes just a little bit longer. The melting point is much higher. And if you're wondering why you can't use just soy wax, it's because soy wax stays really soft and pliable once it's set. So this doesn't really work for taper candles, which is why you use them mainly for container candles. And I didn't use 100% beeswax just because it has a yellowish tint to it, so it's a little bit harder to dye. But if you wanted to just use beeswax and leave it all natural and roll it in the herbs, that works perfectly. Just keep in mind that beeswax is about twice, if not more, the cost of the same amount of soy wax. So soy wax is a lot more affordable, but I understand a lot of people are vegan and might not want to use beeswax, but traditionally taper candles are made with paraffin, but paraffin isn't as natural or clean burning as soy or beeswax, so I choose not to use that. But you're more than welcome to use that if that's what you'd like. And I think, I'm no candle expert, but I believe the dye shows up better in paraffin wax. So you might need to use less candle dye if that's a consideration. If you're using paraffin, soy wax, you need a little bit more candle dye, and candle dye can be a bit expensive. I bought a box, the candle dye I'm using in this video, a small box with maybe 12 or 16 different colors, was about $25. So it's a little bit pricey, but it will last you a long time. As you can see, I sort of just eyeballed it. I added about half orange and half yellow. I would say about a quarter teaspoon. But you just have to keep testing the color on a paper towel. Just stir it up until it melts together, and then just place a couple of drops onto a paper towel and see if it's the color you like. And it wasn't for me, so I kept adding a little bit, stirring, and I tested about 3 times. And I'm not really a big fan of these candle dyes. If you guys have any suggestions on where to get some good ones, I found that the orange one in here was a little bit of a neon color, which I wasn't a big fan of, but hey, it served its purpose. And of course, when you're making these candles, you're always stirring with intention and really thinking of the purpose of your spell, or if you're going to place these on your altar for Samhain, if these are going to be for ancestral work, just always be thinking about your intention when you're making these candles. These aren't just regular taper candles, so as we're stirring, we're thinking about our ancestors, we're thinking about calling upon the spirits and the veil thinning on Samhain. Just really keep that in mind when you're making your candles. Once you are satisfied with the color of your wax, now is time for the fun part, the dipping. And on the first dip, you should hold it in for about 20 or 30 seconds just to get that wick fully saturated. And then between dips, I forgot to mention, it's handy to have a glass of cold water near you just between dips to help it set just that extra little bit, because once you're dipping a bunch of times, it'll just keep re-melting the previous wax you put on it, and it'll work, but you have to let it sit for a few minutes between each dip, and who has time for that? That doesn't make it fun. So get a glass of cold water and just dip it in between each dip into the candle wax. How many times can I say dip? Keep dipping your candle until you've reached the desired thickness. I would say I did it about 25 or 30 times until I was finished. Also, make sure to keep in mind the size of candle holder you'll be using. I didn't measure at all, and luckily they did fit into my candelabras, but keep that in mind as you're dipping. Don't make them too large if they're not going to fit in whatever candle holder you're going to be using. Once you're satisfied with the size and thickness of your candle, it's time to trim off the weight. And using a pair of scissors or a sharp knife, you can lay it down and cut the little metal nut that you've been using as a weight, and you can place this little extra bit back in to your melted wax. And then to round off this edge at the bottom, you're going to want to dip it just a few more times to seal it in and make it look a little bit more pretty. Place all your herbs on a paper plate, and right when the candle's hot out of the wax melter, quickly pat the herbs on and just roll them around. Apply a little bit of pressure so they really stick on there, and don't add too many, because when you use a lot of herbs and flowers on any type of ritual candle, they can tend to either snuff the wax out or really, with these taper candles, blaze up, and that could be a fire hazard, so be careful. But I chopped up my herbs pretty finely, and here you can see the final product. I decided to make a few black ones just because I wasn't really satisfied with that orange color. I just added some black dye over the orange, and that worked really well, so I didn't have to waste any. And then once the wax gets too low to be really dipping them in, I made some just small container candles. And here are the finished taper candles. Woo! So whether you're using these just on your altar, or if you're doing a special Samhain altar, or even for Dia de los Muertos, you can use these. But if you're using these for an actual spell, it works for that too. Or if they're just decorative, I mean, what in witchcraft isn't done with purpose? Come on. They're not just decorative, but I mean, if you're not doing them for any specific ritual work or spell work or casting anything, then these look beautiful on your altar. And I hope you guys have a beautiful Samhain. If you've been following along for the entire series, thank you so much for sticking with me, and I hope you really enjoyed these videos. If you have any questions or comments down below, just leave them down there. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Thanks guys, see you next time.